How do you do, everyone? We're greeting you now from the Naval Air Base at Lakehurst, New Jersey, from which point we're going to bring you a description of the landing of the mammoth
Thursday,
airship
May
Hindenburg.
6th, 1937. The largest airship ever built, the Hindenburg, flies into the United States. It's almost the size of the Titanic and the pride of Nazi Germany. 4 news cameras are here to film the ship's arrival. The events about to unfold will become one of the biggest mysteries of the 20th century. 97 people are on board. Despite the raging inferno, miraculously, some survive.
It's crashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the boarding pads, and all the folks agree that this is terrible. This is the worst.
This film recounts the true story of the investigation that followed in the days after the tragedy. It is told through detailed reconstruction of events as they happened, with eyewitness testimony. The memories of living survivors.
Then she grabbed me again and flew me out. My sister was just too heavy for her.
And the interpretation of modern-day experts.
Had somebody wanted to bring it down, it would have been relatively easy to do it. What was that?
Who or what destroyed the Hindenburg? One man is determined to find the truth. The man who built and created the great airship, Dr. Hugo Eckner.
How could anyone have survived that inferno? I owed it to the survivors and the dead to turn tragedy into reason.
The answer he would find would shock the world.
Get out of the way! Oh my goodness, this plane's now climbing 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and oh, the humanity and all the tragedy around us.
On the day that would make history, every last detail of the Hindenburg's final hours would be scrutinized. This was the giant ship's 11th voyage to the U.S. She was hit with bad weather all down the New Jersey coastline.
Is that how you spell Hindenburg?
The airship had been expected at 6 in the morning, but storms had delayed the landing. As usual, the press were waiting, battling the weather.
Hey, Commander! When are our German friends turning up?
I'll keep you informed.
I thought Germans are renowned for their efficiency. Krauts.
Commander Rosendahl was the officer in charge at Lakehurst. It was his responsibility to call the ship in. He was under great pressure. The Hindenburg was due to make its return flight back to Germany that same evening.
Reporters are getting impatient.
It's not just the reporters. I got 70 passengers waiting to board the return flight. Maybe you should go home. I can't say when the weather will improve enough to get the ship down. I'll catch up with the weather reports.
The commander's wife, Jean, waited at Lakehurst to greet the officers of the great ship. There to record the ship's arrival for his Chicago radio listeners was Herbert Morrison. His report would become one of the most famous in the history of broadcasting.
Howdy do, everyone. We're greeting you now from the Naval Air Base at Lakehurst, New Jersey, from which point we're going to bring you a description of the landing of the mammoth airship Hindenburg, which was due here in America this morning at dawn, completing the first transatlantic crossing of the 1937 season.
The delay to the landing created anxiety at Lakehurst. The tension was even greater on the flight deck of the Hindenburg. At the helm and responsible for the landing, Captain Max Pruss. With a crew of 61, this was his first transatlantic flight in charge. His decisions in those final moments would be critical.
The storm is passing. We'll be done by 6 or soon after.
12 hours late.
Pruss was under the close supervision of Ernst Lehmann, head of flight operations for the Zeppelin Company that built the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg was the most luxurious way to fly. The same comfort as an ocean liner, but twice the speed. 2.5 days from Germany to America. A single ticket cost 1,200 Reichmarks, the average annual German wage. The 36 passengers were the wealthy elite of German and American society.
It's stormy. I'm just glad we're landing.
Today, there are just 2 living survivors of the disaster. One of them was the airship's youngest passenger, Werner Dörner. He still remembers the initial excitement of the family trip.
My father chose the trip on the Hindenburg because he had made the trip on the Graf Zeppelin in 3 years earlier. And he just loved it. So he wanted to give us a special treat with it. And, well, give himself also.
As the ship flew over New Jersey, Werner, his brother Walter, and their older sister Irene looked excitedly down onto America. At 5:45 p.m., a passenger, Joseph Spa, started filming on his movie camera. Remarkably, this footage would survive. For some, this would be their last moments, captured on film. On board was the ship's smoking room, the only place a passenger was allowed to smoke.
Steward, same again.
This cabin was specially pressurized. It had to be, since any spark was dangerous. Above the passengers, an 800-foot metal corridor where 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen gas was stored. This gas gave the ship its buoyancy, but if mixed with air, it was highly flammable. The Germans had used the gas this way for the past 30 years. The crew was confident of the ship's safety. Joseph Spa was even allowed access to the central corridor.
Soon, you'll be taking your first walk in America. Oh, wait until you see the dog biscuits they have there. Everything is bigger in America. Especially their heads.
The Hindenburg safety record was impeccable, so May 6, 1937 was business as usual.
Werner, get those dishes washed as soon as you can. We have to turn the ship around as quickly as possible. We take off again at midnight.
So I won't get to see New York?
Next time, I promise.
Werner Franz, the cabin boy, was on his 5th trip. He is the only other living survivor.
I was 14 years old. This was an amazing experience. I had just finished school with no job and feeling downhearted. And then something like this happens. It was like a gift from heaven.
At 7:11 p.m., the Hindenburg approached Lakehurst.
There she is!
This was the ship's 11th trip to the U.S., but spectators never failed to be amazed that an airship the size of an ocean liner could float so gracefully through the sky.
Run through the station.
What was about to happen in the next few minutes would become the focus of an intense investigation.
Now they're coming in to make a landing of the Zeppelin. I'm going to step out here and cover it from the outside. So as I move out, we'll just stand by for a second. There are a number of important personages on board, and no doubt the new commander, the Captain Max Pruss, is thrilled too, for this is his great moment. The first time that he's commanded the Hindenburg, for on previous flights he acted as a chief officer under Captain Lehman.
All crew to landing stations.
All crew to landing stations.
It's a marvelous sight. It's coming down out of the sky. It's pointed directly towards us and toward the mooring mast. The mighty diesel motors just roared, their propellers biting into the air and throwing it back into a gale-like whirlpool. No wonder this great floating palace can travel through the air at such a speed with these powerful motors behind it.
Everyone was excited. It seemed like everything was normal.
Now the sun is striking the windows of the observation deck on the eastward side and sparkling like glittering jewels on a background of black velvet. And every now and then the propellers are caught in the rays of the sun and their highly polished surfaces reflect circles of gold. They they've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship, and it's been taken a hold of down on the field by a number of men. It's practically standing still now. It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit.
What happened next was only noticed by one witness, one of the Navy ground crew.
Look, what's that?
The back motors of the ship are just holding it, just enough to keep it from...
It's burst into flames.
What was that? Oh, God.
Burst into flames and it's falling, it's crashing. Watch it, folks! Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Get this, Charlie! It's firing, it's crashing, it's terrible! Oh my! Get out of the way, please! What is that? It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks would agree that this is terrible. This is the worst catastrophe in the world. Climbing 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. It's smoke and it's rain now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. Oh, the humanity and all the passengers screaming. I can't talk to you. Get in here!
The Hindenburg disaster is still vividly remembered by the only living member of the ground crew, Max Coleman, whose heroism on that day ensured the survival of others.
When it got on the ground, we turned around and went back toward the ship. The place that I got my man out, I wouldn't have gone in there at all. I mean, he come walking out of a wall of flame. And it's remarkable that he could live just enough to get away from the ship. And he was having trouble getting over this girder that was about knee high. And I just took a hold of his hand and I said, "Step up." And he stepped up and over the girder, and I pulled it, taking him away from the ship. I just stopped and taking his clothes off of him, see, just flicking the fire off of him. When I put my finger in that belt, it just fell apart, just like it was ashes. And my hands smelled for a month. Smelled just like that burning flesh.
I told you, I cannot talk to people.
Those that made it out of the burning ship still recall the horror they faced.
Das Schlimmste war halt das Flammenmeer.
The worst was the sea of flames. It carried on burning for a long time. Some parts of the wreckage burned till the morning after. I ran back towards the ship, but of course I was not able to help at all. I saw the wounded figures coming out of the ship. I saw the burned figures.
Gestalten da gesehen.
I don't remember having been thrown out, and I don't remember having been in the air, but I remember lying in the sand, and that Walter walked over and told me, "Get up, we have to get out of here."
Commander Rosendahl was deeply traumatized.
More men over here now!
1 minute he was in charge of the landing, the next surrounded by carnage. Confusion reigned. But the one man who could possibly solve this mystery was 4,000 miles away, the creator of the Hindenburg, the airship pioneer, Dr. Hugo Echner.
The call came to my hotel at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah?
I was on a 3-day conference promoting the wonders of airship travel.
What? Are there any survivors? My God.
The call came from a New York Times reporter. I was told that the wreckage burned for 3 hours.
Just a little bit further. Come on.
My good friend, Commander Rosendahl, had to set up a temporary hospital in the hangar that was to house the Hindenburg. There was a shortage of doctors and nurses to deal with the injured and dying. Of the 97 crew and passengers, 35 died and 1 member of the ground crew. I was amazed there were any survivors. I believe a corner of hell landed on Lakehurst that day.
Excuse me, I must call Berlin.
I had to get to America. Herr Goering sent a car to take me to Cherbourg port. I didn't even have time to return home to say goodbye to my wife. Of course, Austrian news reporters were already waiting for a story.
Have you anything to say regarding the Hindenburg explosion? Do you think this might be a case of sabotage?
I have no idea why the ship exploded. Sabotage might perhaps be a possibility.
Goering had warned me not to speak of sabotage, but I was never one to toe the party line. I needed to work out for myself what destroyed my ship. I would not rule out sabotage until I knew the facts. But it would be 6 days before I reached America. 6 days with the question why running in my head. Airships were my life and the Hindenburg my greatest achievement. Now I asked myself, was this the end of everything? I needed to know the truth.
News of the Hindenburg disaster flashed around the world. There was no obvious reason why it exploded. It was shocking, but also a mystery. The hunt was on to find the truth. Some survivors were still fighting for their lives, and they might have evidence. The morning after the crash, Commander Rosendahl started to question the survivors with the worst injuries. He was sure the officers from the Hindenburg control gondola would have answers. Close to death, Captain Ernst Lehmann was able to talk, in spite of his terrible burns and a great deal of morphine.
Doctor tells me your lungs are in good shape. You can breathe without coughing. That's a good sign. How many dead? I don't know yet. People are still being brought in. It's a miracle anyone got out. My God, it was...
Yeah, but... infernal machine.
What?
An infernal machine.
You mean a bomb?
Lehmann's words of an infernal machine led Commander Rosendahl to believe that sabotage was the most likely cause of the explosion.
The Hindenburg disaster. Just how did this terrible tragedy happen? The wreckage is now under military guard. and a board of inquiry has already started to hear the testimony of eyewitnesses inside the very hangar that would have housed the giant Hindenburg herself. They will soon be joined by the man who built the Hindenburg, Dr. Hugo Echner. The great airship was the doctor's most powerful yet to come out of the Zeppelin factory at Friedrichshafen. The German nation took pride as the Hindenburg passed over the Berlin Olympics, and Dr. Echner was at the helm when it crossed the Atlantic for the first time last year. That was better times. And now all that remains is tragedy.
The destruction of Nazi Germany's great propaganda machine on a U.S. military base looked bad. An immediate investigation was ordered. Within 4 days of the disaster, Commander Rosendahl established an official inquiry at Lakehurst. The inquiry was headed by the military judge, Colonel South Trimble. It began by recording the testimonies of the ground crew.
This investigation will focus on 2 issues. First, was the ship the victim of a criminal attack? Or did a series of physical or other circumstances combine in such a way that a fire could result?
Even though the Germans might have been attempting to make as much haste as possible, the ship seemed to collapse in.
Even in the first few testimonies, it was apparent that the landing had been hasty.
Due to the change in the flame that I saw was about
Different reasons for the crash were discussed, but the more that was heard, the less was understood. The evidence would need piecing together carefully by someone who knew the airship inch by inch.
to the fire product to the ground.
The same day Dr. Echner's ship was due in New York, news cameras filmed the coffins of the German dead in the New York docks. Germans and Americans lined up to salute. At Lakehurst, the inquiry was into day 3. The crash was barely a week ago. People were still in shock, including the commander.
Hey, you!
It's all right. I know that man.
Commander. Herr Doctor. I can't tell you how sorry I am. Don't worry, we'll find whoever's responsible for this. I've spoken to the FBI.
The FBI?
It looks like sabotage.
Have you evidence for that?
We haven't gathered all the evidence yet, but I've no doubt we'll find it.
Echner knew he must stay detached and focused, like a detective, to solve the disaster. For over 70 years, experts have analyzed the Hindenburg mystery. One man who has studied it extensively and understands Echner's role in the investigation is historian Rick Zitarosa of the Lakehurst Airbase Museum.
I guess some people have said Echner was one of the original modern-day control freaks. Even when he wasn't present, he was there. He would find out. He checked everything. One of Echner's precepts was, you don't assume anything. You make sure you know. And that was a key to the successful operation of the Zeppelin enterprise up until May 6, 1937.
Echner knew it was his responsibility to find out what had gone wrong.
Echner had to know. Echner was determined to avenge the deaths of 13 passengers, 22 crewmen, and 1 ground handler. Don't forget, these are the first paying passengers that have ever been killed or even seriously injured in the history of the Zeppelin operation. And they'd been carrying passengers since the first excursion flights around 1910.
Commander Rosendahl told me the inquiry was already moving along fast, taking place in the very room that had been used as a morgue during the night of the disaster.
At ease. I'll make sure you have the transcripts of all the testimonies heard so far. Nothing conclusive's come out.
To me, the whole of Lakehurst felt like a graveyard.
Those artifacts were salvaged from the wreckage.
Lehman is alive?
No, he was. His burns were too extensive. I'm sorry, Doctor.
Commander, there's a call for you, sir.
Excuse me, Doctor.
Where were the answers? I had built airships for the past 30 years. I knew the best design, a rigid aluminium structure supporting 16 separate gas cells, all knitted together by a web of steel wires. Yes, the gas cells contained pure hydrogen, but I knew everything about building the safest airship run on hydrogen. I had done this for 3 decades without the slightest mishap. But for the Hindenburg, the only thing different from my original design were the 50-foot swastikas on the tail fins. I was relieved to see the 2 crew survivors, Heinrich Kubis,
Please, be at ease.
and Werner Franz, the 14-year-old cabin boy.
Was it a bomb, Herr Doctor?
We must examine every possibility. You had a very lucky escape, Werner.
Yes, Herr Doctor.
How long have you been a crew member?
Just over a year, Herr Doctor.
Herr Kubis, did you notice anything odd about the passengers during the flight?
No, there was nothing.
Was there anything out of the ordinary before the flight?
Everything was in order, Herr Doctor.
Tell me everything you can remember about the flight from the very beginning.
Well, the day began like any other. I was looking forward to the journey. After all, this was our first trip of the season. And going to America was always exciting.
Do you want to rise, Herr Kubis?
You should conserve your energy for work, my boy.
Werner Franz still remembers how vast the great machine was.
Die ersten Eindrücke, die ich überhaupt von der
When I first walked into the hangar, I couldn't see the airship. It had filled the hangar entirely.
Das Schiff hat ja die Halle vollkommen ausgefüllt.
She's 245 meters long. That is only 9 meters short of the Titanic. She is covered in 34,100 square meters of canvas.
Da habe ich vor einer grauen Wand gestanden.
I stood in front of what I thought was a grey wall. It took a while before I actually realized that I was standing in front of the ship.
Das hat schon einen Moment gedauert.
The tail fins are each 41 meters high. And she holds a total of 200,000 cubic meters of hydrogen.
200,028 cubic meters, sir.
Oh, don't worry, sir. You can't smoke on the journey. We have a special smoking room which is separated from the rest of the ship.
Werner Dörner also recalls standing in awe with his brother and father.
When we got the tour of the Hindenburg, which was in the hangar, everything was enormous. I was very impressed with the huge tires below the gondola and the tail, and also on the huge propellers behind the motor gondolas.
Could a bomb really have been smuggled on board? Eckner knew it would have had to get through customs at the Frankfurt airfield.
Did any of the passengers behave suspiciously?
I knew Mr. Morris. He had flown on the Graf Zeppelin. Well, the Dörner family were excited, especially those little boys. This was Miss Mather's first flight. She was very talkative, perhaps a little nervous.
I like your shoes.
Thank you. I like your shoes also.
These are Italian.
The pre-flight procedure was, as usual, very thorough. There was one passenger, however, who was, how can I say,
Hold the ship!
well, not like the others. He arrived late, I remember.
You have a ticket, sir?
Yes, I do.
His name was Josef Spar. He was traveling back to America to see his family.
What is in the box?
It is a gift for my daughter.
Could you open it, please?
Oh, must I? But it's gift wrapped.
Please, open the box.
Mr. Spar was a comedian. I mean, a professional comedian. He was allowed to travel with his pet dog, which is a first for the Hindenburg.
I can confirm it is a girl. Maybe you'd like to search my dog.
Is he hiding anything?
I don't know, shall we ask? Are you hiding anything? He says no.
The customs officers were not amused.
Hula, hula.
And after takeoff?
All was normal. After checks, the ship was ready for liftoff. As usual, we left it until the evening when the air is calmer. There was a slight rain, but the takeoff was smooth, as it always is.
Oh, please do. Nelson Morris.
Margaret Mather.
Eckner could not rule out any of these passengers as possible saboteurs.
Engine standby.
Engine standby.
You going home?
I'm going to see my family, but I can't take a ship. I suffer from terrible seasickness.
Prepare to disconnect from mast.
Prepare to disconnect from mast.
Traveling by airship is like being held aloft in the arms of angels.
Are you a poet, Mr. Morris?
Alas, no. I read it in their brochure.
Ship away.
Ship away.
Steward?
There was the usual excitement. Mr. spied a movie camera and filmed the passengers. Fortunately, people were not offended. But apart from the funny man, everything was quite normal, Herr Doctor.
On his first day at Lakehurst, Eckner insisted on screening all the newsreels of the crash. It was the first time in history such a disaster had been captured on film. But incredibly, not a single camera had been rolling the moment the explosion ignited.
34 seconds. From the fire beginning to the ship hitting the ground, 34 seconds. Could you run it one more time? See how quickly the fire spreads. It begins at the aft section, burns through the axle corridor, and a spout of flames exits the nose so quickly. It all happens so quickly.
Excuse me, Doctor.
Enough. Thank you.
The newsreels were disturbing to watch, but invaluable to Eckner. He needed to analyze every piece of evidence. Anything could be vital to finding the truth.
What was the weather like on the day of the landing?
Stormy, but the storm had passed by the time I gave permission for the landing.
I would like to see the weather log.
Sure. I'll have it sent over first thing tomorrow.
Thank you. During the inquiry at Lakehurst, Commander Rosendahl and his wife Jean invited me to stay at their house. When I arrived, I was surprised to learn that Rosendahl was already speaking to the FBI.
Doctor, I was hoping we could go through a few notes. Rosendahl.
You know, I had that table all set for dinner that night. Charles had invited Hindenburg's officers over before they flew back to Germany.
Have we informed the FBI?
Afterwards, coming home and seeing that table all set for a dinner that would never happen, it's one of the saddest things I ever saw.
They're gonna have to start taking this seriously.
Do you really think it was a conspiracy? Charles says Captain Lehman is convinced there was a bomb on board.
We must examine all the evidence first, and then we shall
Well,
know.
keep me informed. There's been a development. Footprints were found near the perimeter fence. The FBI are insisting they're only at the inquiry as observers.
The FBI investigate only when there is a crime, do they not?
Captain Lehman was sure there was a bomb.
Forgive me, but what has that to do with footprints?
Maybe he had an accomplice.
Who had an accomplice?
The saboteur.
If we assume there was one.
I'm sure that Dr. Eckner would like to go to bed.
Thank you. I am tired, yes. Thank you.
You're going out now?
I won't be long. We have to do this before it rains again.
I'll show you to your room.
Thank you.
The FBI would only investigate if evidence of sabotage emerged. Commander Rosendahl believed he had found it. That evening, he took FBI agent Devereaux to look at suspicious footprints on the edge of Lakehurst Airfield. With any disaster, sabotage is always a strong candidate. An airship full of flammable hydrogen would always be vulnerable. One expert who has looked into the various ways it could have been sabotaged is aeronautical engineer Graham Dorrington.
Had somebody wanted to bring it down, it would have been relatively easy to do it. It wouldn't need a bomb. It could be a relatively small device, perhaps one of the flash bulbs of the day. And if somebody had slashed one of the cells in 2 places, it would be sufficient to ignite hydrogen, and that would lead to the destruction that followed. If it was slit inside, it would explain why nobody saw anything prior to the sudden flames that we see in the accident.
But could his ship have been brought down by a bomb? Echner knew it was possible, but he was determined to stick to the facts.
The Hindenburg disaster. It took just 34 seconds to destroy this proud airship and end the lives of 36 people. So how did it happen? Could it be sabotage? Survivors of the Zeppelin crew, among them a 14-year-old cabin boy, await the call to testify. Will they get to the truth behind what or who destroyed the giant airship?
On my first day at the inquiry, I knew I would come face to face with the survivors of the tragedy. Of 61 crew members, 21 had survived, but many more were fighting for their lives. It seemed the sooner a reason was found for the disaster, the sooner people could find peace. But would it be the truth?
The initial flames were on the port side, and it appeared to me that these flames were coming from the inside of the superstructure, above and aft the rear port motor and ahead of the rear port fin.
As the ground crew testimonies continued, there was one account in particular that caught my attention.
A couple of seconds before the fire, my attention was taken by a noticeable fluttering of the outer cover on the top port side. No smoke or other disturbance accompanied the flutter when I first saw it. It was a wave motion. The motion of the surface was not due to the slipstream or resonance effect of the propeller. It was more like some gas action inside, like the gas was rising and escaping.
For me, this was a vital piece in the jigsaw of what had gone wrong. But I think the reporters were less convinced.
This is all way too technical. All people want to know is, who did it?
Well, I hear the FBI is actually onto something. It's the Bolsheviks you were seen hanging around.
Excuse me, gentlemen. What do Bolsheviks look like? Do they wear a uniform? How does one identify them?
I'm just saying what I heard there, Doc, that's all.
I thought journalists were supposed to report only the facts.
Never let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Got that right.
At the inquiry, a table of objects rescued from the burning wreck were on display, including Margaret Mather's book and a child's toy car. At this stage, anything might be a clue.
Belonged to one of the little donor boys. I had to take it from him. The wheels gave up sparks. Frau Dönner, I'm very sorry.
Before leaving, my grand aunt had given me a little cart, and this cart would run on the floor and spew sparks to the front. So when Mr. Kubis saw that, he took it away from us. That was confiscated. That was not allowed.
Werner, Walter, you must give this car to this man. Walter?
I promise I shall take good care of it, and I'll return it to you as soon as we can. Thank you.
Herr Kubis was right. Sparks were always a risk. From the highest to the lowest of rank, all were totally safety conscious. After all, they were flying over the Atlantic under 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen. At the end of each day, after the official inquiry was over, I held my own unofficial one, questioning the survivors of the Hindenburg's crew. Everyone had a theory.
Could sparks from the exhaust have gotten into the ship?
Sparks from the exhaust are not hot enough to ignite hydrogen. Exhaust temperatures do not exceed 250 degrees centigrade. The ignition temperature for hydrogen is 700 degrees centigrade.
What about lightning, Herr Doctor?
I understand the lightning storms had already passed by long before the ship came into land.
But Echner knew nothing could be ruled out at this stage.
Does anyone remember anything about the flight
which was out of the ordinary.
The only thing that kept bothering us was that we were going so slowly. I understand that for some of the journey we were traveling at only 40 knots. I mean, that's only half the airship's usual speed. I knew this would cause tensions in the gondola, especially when we hit those storms over the Atlantic.
We must try and make up the time.
I never encountered headwinds as strong as this. If we skirt the storm front, we might find some calmer air behind. Thank you, Werner.
Now, it's nearly time for dinner, boy.
He seems a little distracted.
He lost his son recently to pneumonia. He was 2 years old.
Living survivor Werner Franz recalls flying through the storms.
We got into quite a heavy storm, and the ship began to sink slowly. But because of the size of the ship, it withstood everything.
How long did the lightning storms continue?
All through the night. Well, they made the passengers a little nervous, well, as they always do.
Don't worry about the storm. We can fly around it. We can even fly through it. If lightning strikes the ship, it will simply be discharged.
That's very reassuring.
And the moral of that tawdry little tale, gentlemen, is never marry an actress.
Nelson has a habit of taking up with the wrong girl.
Myself, I feel very fortunate that I have actually found the perfect woman. Yeah? Of course, I'm yet to tell my wife.
Lightning was unsettling for passengers, but not a problem for the Hindenburg. Lightning strikes spread across the outer canvas and along the internal metal frame. The gas cells of flammable hydrogen remained unaffected, unless they were punctured, an unlikely event. The storms lasted for 12 hours, seriously delaying the journey.
I was told the airships have a reputation for punctuality.
Yes, we have a good record. But we have faced strong headwinds all the way so far and have lost a good deal of time. After landing, we must turn the ship around as quickly as we can for the return flight to Germany. Many of our passengers have booked onward flights to London for the King's coronation.
Why doesn't Germany have a king?
We have a chancellor instead.
He just acts like a king.
Gentlemen, I must feed my dog. He's German. Needs his meals regular.
As Eckner looked for clues in that final journey, one thing was never far from people's minds.
What about sabotage? There's plenty we'd like to bring down as symbol of the Reich.
Herr Göring does not think it was sabotage.
With all due respect, sir, that's a political statement.
You have to ask yourself who benefits.
What are you suggesting?
It's obvious, isn't it? Who runs this world?
Yeah, the Jews are behind everything. Please don't get them started, Herr Doctor.
We heard there was a letter. Some warning that the ship could be attacked.
There are always such letters. The world is full of crazy people.
Crazy enough to blow up an airship?
I had seen Captain Lehmann wandering along the corridor throughout the trip. Was he looking for bombs, Herr Doctor?
I am not so sure. He was probably just looking for damage from the thunderstorms. I knew about the letter. Perhaps I too should have paid a little more attention to the sabotage threats. I believe my good friend Commander Rosendahl was trying to make some headway with the FBI.
The letter was sent to the German embassy in New York before the Hindenburg left, claiming there would be a bomb on board.
Yes, we know about the letter.
What are you doing about it?
It's most likely a crank. We're looking into it.
I hope you are. We fished a piece of metal out of the wreckage the other day. It had some yellow residue on it. You guys should check it out in your labs.
Commander Rosendahl, I'll send it in as you request, but the Bureau is not authorized to begin any criminal investigation.
What about the footprints?
They haven't led anywhere.
Is that some sort of FBI joke?
No joke intended, Commander. Sightseers usually gather by the perimeter fence whenever the airship comes into land. It would be strange not to find footprints.
There's something else you guys should look into. But judging by your attitude to date, I can't believe you'll take it seriously.
What's that?
I'm getting reports that there was a passenger who had access to off-limits areas. He had a dog in the cargo bay he was allowed to go and feed. The interesting thing is this guy is an acrobat. He could easily have climbed into the internal rigging and planted a device.
Why would he plant a bomb when he was on board himself?
The ship was 12 hours late. Had it arrived on schedule, he would have been well away from the scene by the time it went off. The passenger's name is Joseph Spar.
Really shouldn't be allowing you to this area, sir.
Yes, thank you. It's my dog. He won't eat unless I feed him myself. I spoiled him from a puppy. Dog biscuit.
No, thanks.
You know, it's really quite a thing, this airship.
It is. This way, sir.
Yes, it's time for your dinner, little one. This is Uncle Kubis. Say hello to Uncle Kubis.
I will have to return to my duties, sir.
Say bye-bye. Bye-bye.
What about this Spar character?
He was all right.
Did you not think he was a little suspicious? What was he doing in the cargo area? Passengers are not allowed there.
He was feeding his dog. Yeah, he was all right. I'm sure of it.
Hitler is inspecting a lunatic asylum. Everybody is lined up at the end of their beds while he comes down to do the inspection, and they all, as he passes, they all, Hitler, all salute, all except for one person. Hitler is outraged. What is this? Why do you not salute? And the guy, oh, I'm sorry, I work here. I'm not crazy like the rest of them.
Oh, he was all right. Excuse me, gentlemen, but I'm very tired.
Could Spar really have been a saboteur? His unaccompanied visits to the axial corridor gave him the opportunity to plant a bomb. I'm sure if the clash had been on German soil, a confession would have been procured. When his camera was recovered from the wreckage, the film revealed a passenger who seemed to be just enjoying the trip. Filming passengers and icebergs over the Atlantic, hardly the behavior of a saboteur, unless a very clever one.
One decision made by Eckner might have made the Hindenburg a target for sabotage. The 50-foot swastikas on the airship were a price he paid for Nazi sponsorship.
Eckner didn't have any particular love for the Nazis, but he was able to get the funding for the Hindenburg because it was going to be a very, very high-profile symbol of German resurgence. They wanted to be part of it. Eckner needed the money. Eckner took their money. In a way, he sort of made a deal with the devil, but he did need that type of money to get his airship built and flying. And then Hugo Eckner found that his airship had become a political symbol and not necessarily a welcome one.
But Eckner was an engineer, not a politician. Whatever exploded his ship, he knew much of the blame would have to fall at his own feet.
The speech was a varied one, in which Chancellor Hitler appealed to the German people to choose between cooperation and isolation. But Hitler, it appeared, has not chosen. Or if he has, he did not make known his...
Can't sleep?
No.
Me neither. Would you like something stronger? It's our friend.
Once the Zeppelins were welcomed in the United States, since Hitler seized power, everything has changed.
People in America are smart enough to know the difference between a government and the people, Doctor.
However,
Remember when we first brought the Graf Zeppelin here? 250,000 people turned up. Took a day to get away from the airfield.
The roads were jammed up.
It was... what's that word you have? Mayhem. That day I thought I'd build a bridge across the Atlantic. A bridge of friendship made of the best human materials. When I looked down on the wreckage of my Hindenburg, I knew that everything I'd ever dreamt of was finished. And I saw something else in the wreckage which horrified me. I saw Germany.
Das, was ich jetzt hier erkläre, das erklärt Deutschland.
The Hindenburg disaster. Accident or sabotage. The biggest culprit, it's now believed, is the very gas that gave the ship its majesty, hydrogen. This gas is highly inflammable. But could tragedy have been avoided? U.S. scientists had recently discovered another lighter-than-air gas called helium. It doesn't burn. It's as safe as the air we breathe. But Nazi Germany was not allowed to have it due to world fears about German rearmament. How sad that lives could have been saved on that terrible day if only world attitudes to the new Germany were different.
They were using hydrogen because it was cheap, it was available, and it was the gas with which most balloons and airships had been lifted into the air since the 1700s. Now, helium was non-flammable, it was lighter than air, it had great benefits to airships. However, it was slightly heavier than hydrogen, and it was also extremely expensive, roughly 6 to 10 times the price of hydrogen.
The inquiry was into its second week. Would it ever get to the truth? The truth? Perhaps it could only really be found in the meeting I had with the US government 8 years ago, when I had the chance to change everything.
Dr. Eckner?
I would never have believed that the decisions I made on that day would come back to haunt me. Hydrogen. Over 30 years we had perfected the safest way to use it. We were so sure. Such confidence we had to believe our dreams could overcome science.
I hear the Krauts are going to try and pin this on us. They're going to say we should have given them helium. Doctor, do you think this disaster would have been averted had you used helium instead of hydrogen?
Well, it's certainly true that helium does not burn.
And if the American government had relaxed restrictions on helium exports, would those people have survived?
It is too early to make any conclusions.
That's enough, guys. That's enough.
Thank you, Doctor.
Gentlemen, may we begin, please?
It was Commander Rosendahl's day to give testimony. All eyes were on him. He'd signaled the Hindenburg in, based on his reading of the weather being calm enough to land.
Commander, will you state your name, please?
Charles Emery Rosendahl, Commander, U.S. Navy.
Your present duties?
I'm commanding officer of the Naval Air Station Lakehurst, New Jersey.
Commander?
I hope the board will realize that my testimony may be a bit sketchy and broken. There's been little opportunity for me to prepare proper notes as I should have liked. The Hindenburg was coming to the United States on the first of a series of 18 round trips over the North Atlantic. The 1937 schedule had been arranged so that the time of arrival at the station was 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight Saving Time in the morning. The ship was to travel into the coast at Maine and then follow down the east coastline. This was the same movement the Hindenburg had made on her previous 10 transatlantic flights between Frankfurt and Lakehurst.
What's our speed?
68 knots.
Ernst, we are pushing the engines as far as we are able. Radio Lakehurst, inform them we shall be late.
The delay increased tension in the gondola. After all, rich passengers expected punctuality of the Hindenburg.
So, when shall we be landing?
I believe we will be running a little late.
How late?
I cannot say exactly, madam. But Captain Pruse is attempting to make up the lost time.
I have heard that we are to draw lots, and the losers are to be thrown overboard to lighten the ship.
The ship sent a message that set her new time of landing at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. In other words, 12 hours late. In view of the fact that the ship was late and because of their desire to meet the departure schedule to return to Germany, we wished to accomplish the landing at the earliest practical moment. The weather conditions were unsettled on the East Coast in general. At 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we were advised that the Hindenburg was over New York.
Flying over Manhattan was supposed to be the highlight of the trip.
Mom, Dad.
We saw the Empire State Building. The ships in the harbor blew their whistles. Well, you wouldn't hear that much, but you would see the steam coming out of the whistles.
Das war auch eine wunderbare Fahrt.
This was a really nice trip for me as well. I didn't have much to do. All my work was done and I could observe everything. The suburbs before New York and then New York itself, the skyscrapers. Those impressions were again really phenomenal.
Es war wirklich phänomenal.
But soon the lives of those on board would be changed forever.
Make all speed for Lakehurst, Hazard.
All engines full ahead.
Then the Hindenburg headed down the coast towards Lakehurst. At 4 p.m. we encountered at Lakehurst a decrease in pressure, heavy showers, and several thunder showers with an approach of the front.
The Hindenburg was now over 10 hours late.
Hey, Commander! When are our German friends turning up?
I'll keep you informed.
I thought Germans are renowned for their efficiency. Well, it's 10 hours late so far. I've already written my report. Our German friends have invented a beautiful flying machine, but a little bit of rain and their whole schedule goes bust. My advice, take a ship across the Atlantic. It's half the price and twice as efficient.
Local storm conditions lasted from 3:40 until 4:45 p.m. Visibility was reduced. At 5:43, I sent a message to the Hindenburg stating, conditions unsettled, recommend delay landing
until word from station. Advise your decision.
Inform Lakehurst that we will wait until they tell us conditions have improved.
There are passengers waiting for the flight back to Germany for onward flights to London. I don't think the English will postpone the coronation for the Hindenburg.
The English are always changing their kings. I expect there will be another coronation soon.
We received a message from the Hindenburg. We will wait until you report that conditions for landing are better. At 6:15, I sent another message saying, recommend landing now as conditions were rapidly improving. There was occasional lightning in the distance south and southwest, but local conditions were rapidly improving and were, in my opinion, entirely satisfactory for the landing.
Rosendahl was under pressure to land the ship.
Sir, overcast moderate rain, diminishing lightning in west. Looks like the storm is passing through.
Thank God. Where's the Hindenburg?
Forked River, sir, about 14 miles from the station.
Radio the ship. Conditions now considered suitable for landing.
Rosendahl made the final call to bring the Hindenburg in.
Conditions definitely improved. Recommend earliest possible landing.
Can we turn the ship around and get away by midnight?
We'd have to be quicker than we've ever managed before.
We can always improve our performance.
By 7:11 p.m., the Hindenburg finally arrived over the airfield.
There she is!
The ship on this occasion was a little buoyant and made a rather sharp turn towards starboard, but nothing at all unusual. The Hindenburg's approach was a normal approach. She dropped the trail ropes at 7:21 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. About 4 minutes after the trail ropes were dropped, I observed a small burst of flames on the after portion of the ship. My feeling at once was that it spelled the doom of the ship.
Thank you, Commander. We shall adjourn for the day. Thank you.
The commander's testimony was rational and direct. He did not talk of his anguish of that terrible day or even voice his thoughts of sabotage. His account was crucial. I started to wonder how well Rosendahl had read the weather on that day.
The doctor was making lots of notes while I was speaking.
That's only natural, isn't it?
I felt as if I was in an examination. I wasn't doing very well.
You all treat him as though he's great god of the airship.
He is. Nobody wants to let him down.
Charlie, you never let anybody down in your life. That's why they gave you a medal.
Rosendahl's testimony troubled me. It was the commander's role to read the weather, and he believed storms had passed by long before the Hindenburg flew into Lakehurst, as did everyone else. I now had doubts about my good friend's judgment.
Sir, Commander Rosendahl said that you wanted to see the weather log.
Ah, yes, thank you. What time was the crew summoned?
About 5 o'clock, sir.
What were the weather conditions at that time?
The storm front had just passed. We were all relieved because the commander was keen to get the ship down as soon as he could.
Thank you.
The weather log did indeed show that the major storm front had passed by long before the tragic crash. Rosendahl was correct. But Echner saw something else in the weather log, which Rosendahl had missed on the day.
The registration of winds and pressure recorded showed another smaller storm front was present just as the ship came into land, which nobody on the ground noticed. Why would they when the pressure was on to land the Hindenburg?
One thing that they didn't know a lot about in those days was aviation weather. But Echner had an ability, almost an uncanny sixth sense, to be able to read the weather. He became known as the Pope among the officers and men of the German Naval Airship Division, because his ability to read the weather and figure all the arcane variables of airship flight, they were just legendary.
The smaller storm Echner saw in the log may not have produced lightning, but would have created a highly charged atmosphere, creating static electricity and static sparks.
What if hydrogen had escaped and become ignited not by lightning, but by a spark on the ship, perhaps a static spark? I am not a physicist, but I have seen with my own eyes when a ship lands, if the ground crew touch the ropes too soon, they get a static shock that can throw them 10 feet. That is because airships gather a static charge from the atmosphere as they fly, and this needs to be earthed. The landing crew knew this only too well.
If you were standing close to where the line, usually a metal line, where that metal line hit the ground, you'd feel the shock. It could knock you down.
This demonstration it attempts to show the ways we could ignite a hydrogen air mixture. So this is a Tesla coil, and it produces about 30,000 volts, and we can get that kind of discharge in the atmosphere. Just produces a small tingle in my finger, but that would be enough to cause ignition.
If it was a static spark, the Hindenburg should have exploded the instant the landing ropes touched the ground. But it didn't. It exploded 4 minutes later. Static sparks were just another possibility in a jigsaw that I still could not put together. Almost 2 weeks into the inquiry, it was the turn of the Hindenburg crew to give evidence. Helmut Lau was first. He had been just feet from the start of the explosion. His survival was miraculous. The reporters were hoping for a sensational story.
Mr. Lau, what were your duties on the Hindenburg?
I was helmsman.
What was your landing station?
My landing station was in the stern of the ship, in the lower fin.
Mr. Lau, please give the board a description of what you observed.
I was on the now catwalk. That is on the port side of the fin. I heard over me a muffled detonation and looked up.
And so from the starboard side down inside the gas cell, a bright reflection on the front bulkhead of cell number 4. The cell suddenly disappeared by the heat. The flame became very bright, and the fire rose up to the side, more to the starboard side. And I saw aluminium parts and fabric parts went thrown up. In that same moment, the forward cell and the back cell of cell 4 also caught fire. At that time, parts of girders, molten aluminium and fabric parts started to tumble down from the top. The whole thing only lasted a fraction of a second. The ship was dropping rapidly.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you.
If Lau's right and the fire began inside the ship, it could have been an incendiary device.
Rosendahl could be right. There was one person I had to speak to help solve the mystery. But he was in the hospital fighting for his life. The decisions that were made in those final minutes before the Hindenburg exploded were crucial to the inquiry. Only the officers of the airship would know exactly what happened, but only 2 were still alive, both fighting for their lives. One of the men, Captain Samt, the ship's second in command, agreed to give evidence from his hospital bed. Captain Samt was a good man, and he would have taken charge of the Hindenburg someday if fate had not intervened. Samt would provide me with a vital piece of evidence.
Captain Samt, will you please state what your rank was aboard the Hindenburg?
I was a captain in command of the landing.
Were you in command of the airship?
Captain Pross was in command, but I was the first officer.
Captain, describe for us the last 15 minutes of the journey.
After we passed the field for the first time, we passed to the south and left the thunderstorm to the starboard side. We received a report that the thunderstorm was just over the field. To the north, there were still rain squalls, and we turned west in order to get behind them. Near Lakehurst, we had some rain, and we passed the field at a height of about 50 meters. But we saw that the landing crew was not in position, and for that reason we passed over the field and turned around. Turned the motors to half power. The ship was a little light, and we let gas go for about 20 seconds. After that, the ship was swayed off. A little heavy the rear part, and the bow a little light. We took 6 or 7 men from the crew in the middle of the ship to the front in order to equalize the weight. As we approached the mast, the wind shift direction, we had to adjust. We made a turn to the right. We stopped the motors, reversed the back motors, and the front motors idle ahead. Ballast was dropped about 600 kilos because the ship was heavy in the tail. The ship stood still and we dropped the landing ropes. We had nothing to do but wait until the grounding crew pulled the ship down.
Thank you, Captain.
Samt's testimony was critical to the doctor's investigation, but it troubled Eckner. The ship was obviously out of trim, light at the front and heavy at the rear.
What Samt had said could only mean one thing. Hydrogen gas was escaping and had been for several minutes. But how? Had Samt told me everything? I know how such a catastrophe can distort a person's memories. Tomorrow it would be my turn to give my testimony, but I still hadn't worked it out. Gentlemen, in my opinion, something caused the spark which ignited free gas in the upper aft portion of the ship.
But how did the gas escape, Herr Doctor?
What about sabotage?
We've gone over this 100 times, Herr Doctor.
I shall see you all tomorrow at the inquiry. In my opinion, no finer crew ever flew one of my ships. I'm proud of you all, and of your fallen comrades.
Thank you. Thank you. You think the old man worked it out?
I think he's as lost for an answer as the rest of us.
In a few hours, I would give my testimony, but I was still looking for answers. and I felt like an imposter. My testimony was not born out of first-hand experience of the disaster like everyone else, but I owed it to the survivors and the dead to turn tragedy into reason. The answer had to be in those final minutes before the explosion.
It's burst into flames! It's burst into flames and it's falling! It's crashing! Watch it! Watch it, folks! Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Get this trolley! Get this trolley! It's burning, crashing, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks would agree that this
Play
is
that
terrible.
again, please, from the beginning, as it comes in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm out now, outside of the hangar, and what a great sight it is. A thrilling one. It's a marvelous sight. It's coming down out of the sky.
That final turn, there was something extreme about the way the ship came in. I had piloted the ship many times, and to me it almost appeared as though the ship was skidding to port, and then moments later it appears to drop at the tail, heavy at the rear.
As the airship was approaching Lakehurst, it's clear that there must have been some kind of hydrogen leak near the rear of the airship, which would have caused some mixing of hydrogen and air. We know this because the captain orders 6 men forwards, and he did that because he's trying to maintain the balance of the ship. It was becoming heavy at the tail, and he brought men to the front to try and keep it level. And it must have been quite a violent leak to cause that kind of increase in heaviness of the tail. To give you some idea of the speed, it takes nearly 8 seconds to travel its own length, and it would probably take maybe 20 of its own lengths to come to halt. And one of the big problems would be turning it. The pilot always has to plan a long way ahead and be very gentle in his manoeuvres as he comes in. It can't make quick changes at the last minute. Everything happens slowly on an airship. The forces are huge on such a big structure.
Somehow in my bones I felt that last final maneuver had been the Hindenburg's undoing.
I thought the airship was coming in pretty fast. And then it made a sharp turn.
As we approached the mast, we made a turn to the right.
I needed to ask Captain Samt again about that final turn.
Terrific crash!
Doctor, I cannot.
Forgive me, but could you just go over the landing maneuver one more time?
As we approached the mast, the wind shifted direction. We had to adjust.
The wind has changed direction to southwest.
Rather hard to stop.
Rather hard to starboard.
We made a turn to the right.
What kind of turn?
A normal turn.
Some of the crew said it was a sharp turn. Go on.
We revved gas again 2 minutes later. Then again, after another interval of 2 minutes, we were still heavy in the stern, and we dropped water, 300 kilos. Then again, 500 kilos as we approached the mast.
Valve gas, 15 seconds. Cells 3 to 11.
We rev gas again. Gas cells 11 to 16.
10 seconds. 5 seconds. Stop valving gas.
So you were still tail heavy as you approached the landing mast?
Yes.
Send 6 men forward.
Kitchen staff, 6 men forward.
All engines full astern.
All engines full astern.
Forward engines slow ahead.
Forward engines slow ahead.
Rear engines slow astern.
Rear engines slow astern.
Did it not concern you that the ship was tail heavy?
I didn't appear to be out of the ordinary. We used up a lot of fuel battling the headwinds all the way across the Atlantic. We expected to be light.
I had just a few hours to think before I gave testimony. Think. At 17 minutes past 7, the ship turned quickly to starboard. A few minutes later, it was heavier at the rear of the ship. This would happen if gas had escaped, but how? The answer was in there somewhere.
A couple of seconds before the fire, my attention was taken by a noticeable fluttering of the outer cover on the top port side.
Then the ropes were dropped, and 4 minutes later the Hindenburg ignited. And the world changed.
Where's the doctor?
He left early.
He never said anything last night about leaving early.
Well, he's testifying today, isn't he? Probably just wanted to get his thoughts together.
I thought he might have spoken to me first.
Does he have a theory?
He hasn't said, but I guess he's got some ideas.
Want some breakfast?
No, not this morning. I've no appetite.
Everyone was anxious to hear Echner's testimony. The man who brought the great ship to life was about to pronounce its cause of death, but he knew it would not please everyone.
There would be words that could incriminate the crew, my colleagues. The truth can be cold and harsh.
Did you get the lab results on that yellow powder?
Turns out it's residue from a fire extinguisher.
You followed up the letters?
We're still following that line of inquiry up, but as I said, disasters bring out all the lunatics.
I know we're dealing with sabotage. We'll talk later.
Dr. Echner, are you ready to give your testimony?
I am.
Please swear the doctor in.
With regard to the mysterious circumstances surrounding this occurrence, we must, of course, give due consideration to all the possibilities. However, starting with what is known, we can all agree that the fire first appeared in the upper stern section of the ship. From this, we may conclude that there must have been an abnormal buildup of free gas in the rear section. The gas, which we presume to have been there, must have been ignited by some spark. It has been mentioned that lightning might have caused this ignition. However, it has been stated by witnesses that the fire appeared as a wave motion on the top of the ship. That, in my opinion, could not have been caused by lightning. Also, there were no sightings of lightning near the ship. I believe it was ignited not by an electrical spark, but by a static spark. Let me explain. A thunderstorm front had passed the station just prior to the order for the ship to land. If one, however, examines more closely the weather log, the registration of wind currents, temperatures, and the barometer, then one must recognize that this first storm front must have had a smaller, lighter one following it. And if this was not noticed at the field, that is quite natural, because attention was focused on the landing maneuver and the handling of the ship. I would say, therefore, in all certainty, that there was a small tail end to the first thunderstorm, creating the conditions for static sparks to occur. If we accept this explanation, it may appear strange that ignition did not occur immediately the landing lines were dropped, because it would have been then that the airship had been earthed when the ropes hit the ground. But as we know, the ignition took place 4 minutes after the landing lines were dropped. For this, I believe there is a very simple explanation. The landing lines would have been very dry and therefore poor conductors. Slowly, however, they became dampened by the fine rain which was still falling. Thus, the potential difference between the ship and the ground was slowly equalized. The Hindenburg would have become like a giant kite close to the storm clouds. The potential difference between the ship and the overlying air masses would have been sufficient to generate static sparks. This was not lightning, but a small static spark, enough to ignite free hydrogen. I will now refer again to accumulation of gas in the after part of the ship. I am convinced that a leak must have occurred to cause such abnormal accumulation of gas in the rear section. My assumption is confirmed by a remarkable observation made by one of the witnesses. He observed in the rear upper part of the outer cover a peculiar flutter which appeared as if gas was escaping and rising at that point. If the question was put to me as to the cause of such a leak, I could only make to myself the following explanation. The ship had proceeded in a sharp turn to the approach for its landing.
The wind has changed direction to southwest.
Rather hard to stop.
This would have generated extremely high tension in the rear of the ship, and especially in the center sections close to the stabilizing fins, which are held in place by shear wires. Under this extreme tension caused by the hard turn to starboard, I could imagine that one of these wires was then broken, and that broken wire caused a rip in one of the hydrogen cells. Hydrogen gas then escaped from the torn cell and filled up the space between the cell and the outer cover in the rear of the ship, which is why the ship sank at the rear. Finally, this accumulated quantity of gas was ignited by a static spark. Everything apparently occurred in the last 5 or 6 minutes, that is, during the sharp turn preceding the landing maneuver.
Were there any other possibilities you considered?
From a purely speculative standpoint, there are a number of possibilities. One could imagine, for instance, that someone had placed an infernal machine inside the ship and brought it to destruction in that manner. But such a machine would have to be installed in Frankfurt. Not only is there no evidence for such a possibility, it is a theoretical consideration to which I myself cannot assent.
Thank you, Doctor.
My friendship with Commander Rosendahl was never the same. He wanted to believe it was sabotage, not human error, that destroyed the Hindenburg. I believed it was an urgency to stick to a tight schedule. Rosendahl had called the ship in, and Captain Pruss had made the tight turn under pressure from Ernst Lehmann. I believed that the wire would not have snapped if they had not all been under pressure to be punctual, to keep to a schedule. That is the way of the world. Schedules, timekeeping, money. We took pride in our 100% safety record, but I think that day, business underestimated the natural laws of science.
Ector comes to a conclusion, not without great deliberation, and it is not kind to Captain Pruss, Commander Rosendahl, and Ernst Lehmann, because what Eckner sees is a landing of a ship that's badly out of trim, rushed with a very tight turn toward the end, and the possibility that in making that tight turn and that landing, the ship could have been compromised.
But in his heart, Eckner knew he was the one person who could have averted the tragedy. The deaths of 36 people were down to a decision he had made 8 years before. He had a secret that he could never reveal. Dr. Eckner's theory has not been bettered for over 70 years. Mechanical failure, combined with pilot error and static sparks caused by storms. Rosendahl called the ship in. Pruss made the tight turn. Lehmann pressured Pruss to keep to the schedule. Their actions were part of an incredible chain of events.
I think the reporters were a little disappointed. No saboteur, no bomb, no smoking gun.
Herr Doctor, I listened to your testimony with great interest, but to be honest with you, and I'm just an ordinary Joe Schmo here, right? And I just found the whole thing a little bit technical. Is there anything you'd like to say to the relatives, to the families of the people who were lost in the fire? Something not so scientific.
What could I possibly say to them that would be of any comfort?
Thanks, Doc. I'll make sure my readers know just how sorry you feel.
What could I have said? Perhaps I should have told them of my meeting with the US government 8 years ago. We discussed the US embargo on helium. History could have been so different. I was offered the chance to use helium. I could have made it happen. The only other person who knew about the outcome at that meeting was Captain Lehman. After my meeting in Washington, I told Lehman about the helium. He may have been a member of the Nazi Party, but like me, he understood the realities of running such a huge venture as the greatest airship in the world.
Herr Lehman, Herr Doctor, your trip to America was successful.
Yes, they were most sympathetic. They even indicated that they could supply helium.
That's good news, Herr Doctor.
Yes, but matters are not so simple, Herr Lehman. We do not yet have the facilities to either store or transport helium, not in Germany. So, it would also make the ship much more expensive.
So, Herr Doctor, what do you propose?
What we really need from the Americans is investment. We need to build a strong business partnership with America.
And in the meantime?
In the meantime, Herr Lehman, we must prove ourselves. We must show to the world that a passenger Zeppelin service across the Atlantic is entirely safe and viable, without helium. So I chose to continue with hydrogen. But helium would not have burned, and I would not be in Lakehurst staying at the 36 names of the dead.
Herr Doctor.
36 names to remind me of my guilt.
Now, the sun is shining in the windows of the observation deck on the eastward side.
Soon, we'll be taking the first walk in America.
It's practically standing still now. They've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship and been taken hold of down on the field by a number of men. It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit.
Look, up there. What's that? What was that?
Oh, God.
It was a miracle anyone survived the inferno, which destroyed everything in 34 seconds. Survival depended so much on luck. Where someone stood or how they reacted to the blast made all the difference between life and death.
Oh, it's crashing! Watch it, folks! Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Get this trolley! It's fired! It's crashing terrible! Oh, my! Get out of the way, please! Burning! Bursting into flames and it's falling on the mooring mast! Oh, folks, this is terrible!
When the ship exploded, Joseph Spar was at the window. He smashed his way out with his movie camera.
How anybody got out of it was a marvel. Even today, I don't know how as many people could get out of there as they did.
Spar jumped 50 feet and broke his ankle in the fall, but survived. Herr Kubis followed Spar 3 seconds later, and after his jump helped rescue some of his passengers.
One lady threw her baby out at about 50 feet up. Just dropped him over the side, let him fall, free fall. He hit the ground, bounced, and cried. That was it.
That baby was the young Werner Dörner.
We must have been close to the window, so my mother at that point grabbed the first child she saw, which was Walter, and threw him out. Then she grabbed me, tried to throw me out, but something happened and I fell back again. Then she grabbed me again and threw me out. That's where I probably got most of my burns. She tried to throw my sister out, but my sister was just too heavy for her.
The heat was intense. Werner's mother had to choose between staying with her daughter or jumping to safety.
She tried to land on her feet, and that caused her to fracture her pelvis.
Werner's father was still trapped in the burning ship. Of the 6 men who were sent to the bow of the ship, incredibly 3 survived. The flames ripped to the front in no time at all.
The start of the catastrophe came out of the blue. There was a sudden jerk through the entire ship. Then I heard the explosion. It was clear to me that the ship was lost. I needed to find a way out. Then a shower of water hit me. One of the water tanks had burst open over my head. This drenched me from head to toe and possibly helped me think clearly. I reached the hatch and I kicked through the hatch. Then I saw the ground coming towards me. I didn't run straight away, but I turned around and ran the other way, slipping through underneath the ship onto the other side. This was a good decision, because the wind was pressing the flames towards the right side, and I probably would have run into the flames. But I escaped, and I ran to the other side, where most of the survivors jumped off as well.
It's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. It's smoke and it's raining now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast.
Helmut Lau had been feet from the initial explosion. The moment he saw the hydrogen ignite, he ran to an escape hatch in the side of the tail fin, which hit the ground first.
Oh, the humanity and all the passion. Get in here!
But I remember lying in the sand, and that Walter walked over and told me, "Get up, we have to get out of here." We saw them, our mother just a couple of steps behind us. At that point, she saw one of the stewards and asked him to get my sister out. So he went back in and got my sister out. But she was in very bad shape, so he had to carry her out.
Their friends are out there.
The officers from the bridge ran the moment the flight deck crashed to the ground. Only 3 made it out, smashing their way through the windows. After struggling out of the wreckage, the 2 captains, Samt and Pruss, met in the burning wreck. Samt found Pruss helping passengers from the wreck. Pruss's face was badly burned.
Horst! Is that you?
Yes! My God, what a sight you are!
You don't look much better yourself.
Samt and Pruss survived. Captain Lehmann was not so fortunate. He fought for his life until the following day.
I don't understand.
But his burns were too severe. Margaret Mather's survival was the most miraculous. She remained calmly seated in the middle of the passenger lounge as the ship fell.
Lady, you gotta get out of there.
Not without my purse.
After the Hindenburg crashed to the ground, she was helped to safety without a scratch. Nelson Morris and his friend Bert Dolan had been drinking heavily throughout the trip. As he made his way from the dining room, Morris apparently tore through the burning metal girders with his bare hands. His friend Bert Dolan was not so fortunate. He was closely behind Morris, but hit by a falling girder.
No one could speak, least of all me. I was crying until Chief Steward Kubis came over to me and put his arm around my shoulders. He said, "Come on, pull yourself together. Go and see if you can help anyone." So I ran back to the ship, but of course there was nothing I could do to help.
Commander Rosendahl dealt with that terrible disaster bravely. I cannot imagine what was going through his mind as he tried to come to terms with the scale of the tragedy. Of the 97 crew and passengers, 35 died and 1 member of the ground crew.
Hey, leave these people alone. Leave them alone!
children?
The boys are here. I've seen them.
My daughter. My daughter.
I don't know. She's fine, I'm sure. She's fine. She's fine.
Frau Dörner's daughter, Irene, was rescued from the inferno and rushed straight to the hospital. I am told she was still breathing when they got her there, but her lungs were too scorched. I understand the body of Mr. Dörner was found the following morning. A terrible day.
Well, there was practically no question for Walter and myself that my father couldn't make it, because he was in the middle of the thing, that there was no way out, so we didn't even ask about it.
Dass ich davon gekommen bin,
From what I experienced there, my escape was like a heavenly gift. I must say, I learned to appreciate things more intensely than before.
nochmal richtig erlebt alles und viel intensiver erlebt wie vorher.
I realized how quickly everything can come to an end. And I was grateful for everything that I was allowed to experience after that.
Danach noch erleben konnte.
After my testimony, I decided to return immediately to Germany. Some people never did stop believing in sabotage. The acrobat Joseph Sparr was investigated, but the FBI could not find a shred of evidence. I had solved the death of my Hindenburg, but what did that matter? Everything lay in ruins.
Your theory's a good one.
We will never know for sure.
You think I should have waited?
The ship was behind schedule. I understand that you and Captain Post wanted to get her down.
But you would have waited.
You could not have known there was a gas leak.
The reporter was right. If we'd given you the helium you needed, none of this would have happened.
Perhaps next time we meet, we'll be in happier times.
Goodbye, Doctor.
Goodbye, Commander. I was not to meet Commander Rosendahl again until after the war. He never did stop believing some saboteur had brought down the Hindenburg. Perhaps because he felt guilty for calling the ship in. Guilt. I never did tell the commander of my meeting with the US government on the possibility of them supplying helium. Meanwhile, people lost confidence, investment plummeted, and airplanes were developed that could match the airship's range. I had hoped that with the Hindenburg I could build a bridge across the sea between Europe and America. But that bridge lay in ruins. I told Commander Rosendahl that I had seen Germany in the wreckage of the Hindenburg, and within a few years I was proven right. The age of the airship was over, and the skies would be taken over by a more terrifying specter.